The air in The Anchor and Chain was a thick soup of regret and brine. It was the kind of dockside tavern that existed just outside the formal jurisdiction of the Naval Station Norfolk, yet was inexorably tethered to it, a barnacle of vice and memory clinging to the hull of military life. The smells told the story. Stale beer, fried fish, the faint metallic tang of diesel fuel that drifted in on the humid Virginia air, and the underlying scent of damp wood that had seen 1,000 sorrows and 100 brawls. The light was a jaundiced yellow, buzzing from ancient fluorescent tubes that cast long, dancing shadows, making honest men look shifty and shifty men look like phantoms. It was a place for endings and beginnings, for celebrating a promotion or drowning the news of a Dear John letter. Tonight, it was simply a place to wait out the gathering storm that was beginning to lash the coast with sheets of rain. In a corner booth, away from the boisterous cluster of junior officers and enlisted men near the pool tables, a woman sat alone. She was a study in stillness, a pocket of absolute calm in the restless energy of the room. She was not old, nor was she young. Her face was a canvas of competence that gave no clue to her age. Her hair was a nondescript brown, pulled back in a severe, functional bun that allowed no stray strands to defy its order. She wore a simple, unadorned Navy working uniform, the digital blue-gray camouflage blending into the dim light. There were no ribbons on her chest, no gleaming insignia of rank on her collar, just the plain fabric. She nursed a glass of water, her hands resting on the table, one over the other. She observed the room not with curiosity, but with the placid, all-encompassing awareness of a predator at rest. Her presence was so quiet, so utterly devoid of demand for attention, that she was functionally invisible. She was a ghost in the machine of the naval ecosystem, a blank file in a cabinet full of decorated heroes and ambitious climbers. Then, the doors swung open with a crash, admitting a gust of wind, a spray of rain, and Commander Marcus Thorne. If the woman was a ghost, Thorne was a thunderclap. He was a man carved from naval tradition, or at least his own perception of it. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a jaw that seemed permanently set in a state of righteous indignation, he moved through the bar not as a patron, but as an admiral conducting an inspection. His uniform was immaculate, his ribbons a proud rainbow of service in calmer seas, his commander's oak leaves gleaming on his collar, as if personally polished by the god of war himself. Authority did not radiate from him like heat from a furnace. It was a cheap cologne he doused himself in, pungent and overwhelming. He was the product of a system that had rewarded his confidence more than his competence, and his confidence was, by now, boundless. He was king of this small, wet, beery castle. Thorne's eyes swept the room, cataloging, judging. He exchanged loud, backslapping greetings with a few junior officers, his voice a booming baritone that sliced through the low hum of conversation. He was a performer, and this was his stage. His gaze eventually fell upon the corner booth, upon the still, quiet woman. His eyes, accustomed to the clear demarcations of rank and station, saw only an anomaly, a blank uniform, a woman alone in a place where men came to be loud. His mind, a blunt instrument of prejudice and assumption, processed the data and arrived at a swift, satisfying, and utterly wrong conclusion. He saw a pretender, a stolen valor case, or worse, a recruit so green she didn't know the rules. A wave of proprietary offense washed over him. This was his navy, his bar. He strode toward the booth, his polished boots clicking with purpose on the worn linoleum. The small cluster of officers who orbited him like nervous moons followed at a respectful distance. sensing a confrontation was imminent. They had seen this before. Commander Thorne correcting some perceived slight against the dignity of the service was a regular, if uncomfortable, spectator sport. He stopped directly in front of her table, casting a long shadow that swallowed her whole. She did not look up. She did not acknowledge his presence in any way. Her gaze remained fixed on the swirling condensation on her glass of water. This, to Thorne, was the ultimate offense. In his world, his presence demanded immediate deference. "You!" he barked, the single word a crack of a whip. Slowly, deliberately, she raised her head. Her eyes were a cool, clear gray, like the color of the sea on a winter morning. They held no fear, no surprise, no anger. They held nothing but a calm, analytical light. It was like being looked at by a machine. "Are you addressing me?" she asked. Her voice was low and even without inflection. It was the voice of a person for whom wasted words were a cardinal sin. Thorne's face flushed a deeper shade of crimson. The sheer lack of intimidation in her response was an affront. "I don't see anyone else here wearing a uniform they have no right to," he sneered, his voice loud enough for the entire bar to hear. Conversations faltered. The clack of pool balls ceased. Every eye in the anchor and chain turned toward the corner booth. The woman's expression did not change. She glanced down at her own plain uniform, then back up at him. "This uniform was issued to me by the Department of the Navy," she stated. A simple declaration of fact. "Issued to you?" Thorne laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "For what? Peeling potatoes in the mess hall? You have no rank, no ribbons, no warfare pin. You are a disgrace. You haven't earned the right to wear that cloth. In my day, we had respect. We understood that this uniform means something. It is paid for in blood and sacrifice, not handed out to administrative assistants." The last two words were laced with a particular venom, the ultimate dismissal in his mind. He was a man shouting at a mountain, demanding it move, utterly unaware of the geological forces he was provoking. The woman was a lioness, allowing a jackal to dance and yap at the edge of its kill radius, watching with a detached, almost scientific curiosity to see how far it would go. Her calm was not passivity, it was control. A control so absolute it was unnerving. To Thorne, it was mockery. "You will stand when a superior officer addresses you," he commanded, his voice shaking with rage. "I do not recognize you as my superior officer," she replied, her voice still impossibly level. The statement hung in the air, a declaration of war. For a commander to be told this by someone he perceived as less than a seaman apprentice was an unimaginable insult. It was a failure of the universe to adhere to its own laws. "That's it," Thorne snarled, his carefully constructed composure shattering completely. He reached out, his hand a blur of motion, and snatched the cover, the 8-point cap, that rested on the table beside her glass. He held it up as if it were a piece of garbage. "You are a disgrace to this uniform, to every man and woman who has ever served." He leaned in close, his face inches from hers, the smell of whiskey and self-righteousness rolling off him in waves. "Take it off," he whispered, his voice a low, menacing growl. Then, for the benefit of his audience, he bellowed, "I am giving you a direct order. Remove that uniform. You are not worthy to wear it." The woman did not flinch. She did not turn. Her gaze remained locked on his, her gray eyes seeming to peer past his face, past his anger, and into the very architecture of his soul, finding it wanting. She said nothing. Her silence was louder than his shouting. It was a vacuum that sucked all the air and bravado from his posture. leaving him looking like a petulant child. Frustrated beyond measure, he slammed her cover back down on the table. The plastic insert cracked with a sharp report. The glass of water jumped, spilling a small pool across the scarred wood. She blinked once, a slow, deliberate motion. Her eyes drifted down to the cracked cover, then to the spilled water. With a movement of economical grace, she picked up a cocktail napkin and carefully, precisely, began to dab at the puddle. She folded the damp napkin and placed it neatly to the side. Then she picked up her cover, examined the crack with a dispassionate air, and set it back down. Every action was precise, measured, and maddeningly calm. It was at that exact moment that the world ended. Not with a bang, but with a sound. A low, guttural groan of tortured metal that vibrated through the very foundations of the tavern. A sound so profoundly wrong, it silenced every heart in the room. The lights flickered once, twice, then died, plunging the bar into absolute darkness. A collective gasp was sucked from the room. Then, the emergency lights, powered by a backup generator, kicked on with a hum, casting the room in a hellish crimson glow. Simultaneously, every pager and phone in the room screamed to life with the piercing tone of a broadcast emergency alert. It was the sound of catastrophe. The bar patrons, almost all of them sailors, scrambled for their devices. Their faces, illuminated by the glow of their screens, turned from confusion to disbelief, then to stark terror. Outside, the wind, which had been a persistent moan, rose to a primal shriek. The rain was no longer falling. It was being driven horizontally, a solid wall of water that hammered against the building. The sign for the anchor and chain was ripped from its moorings with a screech of tearing metal. A young lieutenant, his face pale as bleached bone, stumbled back from the window. "My God," he whispered, "the George H.W. Bush." Commander Thorne, his personal drama instantly forgotten, shoved his way to the window. Through the maelstrom of wind and water, the sight was apocalyptic. The USS George H.W. Bush, a 100,000-ton behemoth of a supercarrier, was pierside, undergoing emergency maintenance. It was supposed to be secured by more than a dozen massive mooring lines, each as thick as a man's thigh, designed to hold it fast against a hurricane. But this was no hurricane. This was a microburst, a sudden, localized, and unbelievably violent downdraft of wind that had struck the carrier with the force of a physical blow. Under the impossible strain, the forward mooring lines had not just snapped, they had exploded. The groan they had all heard was the sound of braided steel, inches in diameter, parting like thread. Now the colossal ship was pivoting. The stern, still held by its lines, was acting as a fulcrum. The bow, free and caught by the wind, was swinging out, away from the pier, inexorably and with terrifying momentum, directly toward the Thimble Shoal Channel, one of the busiest shipping lanes on the planet. A fully laden oil tanker was making its way inbound. The scene was not just a potential disaster, it was a multi-billion-dollar collision in the making, a national security crisis that would kill thousands and cripple the Atlantic fleet. Panic erupted. The training and discipline of the officers and sailors in the bar evaporated in the face of a problem so far outside their context. Their expertise was on the ship, not in a bar watching the ship destroy itself. Thorne was shouting, but his words were meaningless noise. "Someone get Fleet Command! Get the Port Authority! Where are the tugs?" He was a man shouting orders at a tidal wave, his authority a cheap coat worn in a hurricane. His voice was high-pitched, cracking with a fear he could not conceal. The king had been revealed as a court jester in the face of a true crisis. And in the corner booth, The woman moved. It was not a hurried or panicked movement. It was a shift in state, like a weapon being brought to bear. One moment she was a still life. The next, she was pure, kinetic purpose. She rose from the booth in a single, fluid motion. The crimson emergency light caught her face, and for the first time, there was something in her eyes. Not emotion, not fear. It was an intensity, a terrifying diamond-hard focus that seemed to burn away the chaos around her. She strode past the panicked, shouting Commander Thorne as if he were a piece of furniture. She snatched a Marine Band radio from the wall behind the bar, a relic the owner kept for listening to port traffic. She keyed the mic, but she didn't speak. She listened. For 3 seconds, she listened to the cacophony of terrified, conflicting reports flooding the channel. Then she spoke, and the world bent to her will. "All stations. This is Sea Dragon," she said. Her voice was the same low, even tone, but now it was amplified, cutting through the static and the panic on the radio waves with the clean, effortless authority of a surgeon's scalpel. "Cease all chatter. Channel is now directed." The name, Sea Dragon, was an old, almost mythical call sign, a ghost in the naval ether. It was a name whispered in the halls of the Pentagon and the Naval War College, a name associated with impossible problems and legendary solutions. To the panicked sailors on the radio, it was a voice of impossible authority from nowhere. The frantic chatter ceased instantly, replaced by a stunned, waiting silence. Thorne stared at her, his mouth agape. He saw the same woman, the same plain uniform, but he heard a voice that commanded fleets. The cognitive dissonance was so profound it short-circuited his brain. "Port control," the woman said into the radio, her eyes fixed on the swinging behemoth outside. "What tugs are operational in my immediate vicinity?" A hesitant voice came back over the radio. Sea Dragon, this is Port Control. We have the Dauntless and the Stalwart south of the channel. But they're scrambling, ma'am. We have no assets that can respond in time." "Negative, Port Control," she countered without a moment's hesitation. "Your data is 30 seconds out of date. The commercial tug Poseidon's Wrath is exiting the commercial terminal, unladen. Her captain is a former Navy Master Chief, Eric Madsen. Her engines are hot. Patch him through to this channel. Now." There was a stunned pause. Then a click. Patching, Sea Dragon." The woman's gaze never left the window. She was performing calculations in her head at a speed that would have melted a supercomputer. She was factoring wind speed, the carrier's pivot rate, the water displacement, the torsion on the remaining stern lines, the response time of a civilian tug. A new, gravelly voice crackled over the radio, filled with confusion. "Poseidon's Wrath to unknown station. Who is this?" "Madsen," the woman's voice snapped, and for the first time, there was a hint of steel in it. "This is Sea Dragon. I am invoking Maritime Security Directive 7-4 Alpha. Your vessel is hereby commandeered under the authority of the United States Navy. Do you copy?" Directive 7-4. Alpha was a deeply classified protocol, a break glass in case of Armageddon order that gave certain individuals absolute authority over any and all maritime assets, civilian or military, in a crisis. To hear it invoked on an open channel was like hearing a priest recite the rites of exorcism. The voice on the other end changed instantly. The confusion vanished, replaced by the crisp, unquestioning tone of a sailor recognizing a higher power. "Roger, Sea Dragon. I copy 7-4 Alpha. The Poseidon's Wrath is yours. What are your orders?" The bar was silent as a tomb, save for the howling of the wind and the woman's voice. Everyone, including Thorne, stood frozen, watching this anonymous woman orchestrate a symphony of salvation. "Madsen," she began, her voice a rapid-fire string of commands. "Your current course is 090. I want you to execute an immediate hard-aport turn to a new course of 345. You have a 2,000-ton vessel with twin screws and quart nozzles. You can turn on a dime. Do it now. I need you to approach the carrier's port bow. The wind shear at your location is approximately 90 knots from 270. You will experience extreme list. Do not fight it. Your objective is not to stop the carrier. You cannot. Your objective is to apply asymmetrical thrust to the bow, altering its pivot trajectory by 3.5 degrees. That is all I need." 3.5 degrees, Roger. Madsen's voice was tight with strain. "That's a suicide run, Sea Dragon. We'll be crushed against the pier." "No, you will not," the woman stated with absolute certainty. "The carrier's pivot is creating a bow wave and a corresponding low-pressure zone along its port side. You will ride that pressure differential. It will feel like you're surfing. At the moment of closest approach, you will give me everything you have on your starboard engine, full astern on your port. The torque will be immense. You will hold it for exactly 12 seconds, then break off. Your breakaway vector will be 010. You will pass under the flare of the bow with less than 5 meters to spare. Do you understand, Master Chief?" The use of his old rank was a masterstroke. It was a reminder of their shared tribe, a bond of trust forged in the language of the sea. I, Sea Dragon." "Understood," Madsen replied, his voice now imbued with a terrifying clarity of purpose. 12 seconds of asymmetrical thrust, then breakaway at 010. God help us. "God has nothing to do with it, Master Chief," the woman said, her voice dropping to an almost gentle register. "This is physics. Execute." Outside the window, through the sheeting rain, they saw it. A small, powerful-looking tug, the Poseidon's Wrath, suddenly veered, churning the black water into a white froth. It bucked and heaved in the violent sea, looking like a child's toy against the impossible scale of the supercarrier. It charged not at the ship, but at a point in empty space, a point that only existed in the mind of the woman in the bar. She continued to speak into the radio, her voice now a calm metronome in the heart of the storm. "Bridge, USS George H.W. Bush," she commanded, addressing the frantic crew on the carrier itself. "Report status of aft mooring lines." "Sea Dragon, this is the officer of the deck. The capstans are screaming. Torsion coefficients are off the charts. They're going to snap." "They will hold," she stated, not as a hope, but as a fact. "The Poseidon's Wrath will alter the pivot and reduce the strain by 17% within the next 40 seconds. Your job is to prepare to counteract the secondary motion. The moment the bow's momentum is checked, the stern is going to try to shear away from the pier. I want emergency power to the starboard azipods. Stand by to fire them at 1/4 power on my mark. You will act as your own stern tug." "The azipods are offline for the refit," the OOD yelled back, his voice cracking with despair. "A negative," the woman replied calmly. "Chief Engineer's Report, Supplement B, Paragraph 4. The power couplings were recertified at 0800 this morning. The system is viable. Now get it done, Lieutenant." The OOD was silent for a beat, stunned that this unknown voice knew the minute details of his ship's maintenance schedule better than he did. Aye, ma'am. Standing by." The entire room of sailors watched, mesmerized. Commander Thorne stood like a statue of salt, his face a mask of utter, soul-shattering disbelief. He had screamed at this woman. He had ordered her to remove her uniform. He had accused her of being a disgrace. And now she was single-handedly saving the Atlantic Fleet with a borrowed radio and a mastery of naval science that bordered on sorcery. He was not watching an officer. He was watching a force of nature. "Madsen, you are at the point of contact. Execute now," she commanded. The little tug, now terrifyingly close to the slab-sided steel cliff of the carrier's bow, seemed to dance. It spun, its engines roaring in a symphony of defiance against the storm. It slammed its shoulder into the giant, and for a heart-stopping moment, it looked like it would be swatted aside and obliterated. But just as she had predicted, it held its position, riding the bizarre wave dynamics, its engines screaming as it pushed with all its might. 12, 11, 10. The woman counted down, her voice a steady anchor in the chaos. At the window, Thorne watched the impossible happen. The majestic, terrifying swing of the carrier's bow began to slow. It was an infinitesimal change, a geological shift that could only be perceived against the fixed lights of the distant shoreline. But it was slowing. The trajectory was changing. On 3, 2, 1. "Break away, Madsen! Break away now!" The tug disengaged, and with a final desperate churn of its propellers, shot forward, disappearing directly under the massive, overhanging bow of the flight deck. For 2 agonizing seconds, it was gone. The lieutenant next to Thorne let out a choked sob. Then it emerged from the other side, miraculously intact, bobbing like a cork in the turbulent wake. "Bridge, bush!" the woman snapped. "Mark, fire the starboard azipods! 1/4 power!" A new, deeper vibration shook the tavern as the carrier's own propulsion system, dormant moments before, roared to life. The stern of the massive vessel, which had begun to slide away from the pier, stabilized. The catastrophic pivot was arrested. The ship was held, caught between the ghost command of its own engines and the heroic shove of the Poseidon's wrath. The immediate crisis was over. The oil tanker would pass safely. The fleet was saved. The woman held the radio for another moment, listening to the flurry of relieved and astonished reports now flooding the channel. She issued a few final, precise instructions for securing the vessel with emergency lines and getting damage control teams in place. Then, satisfied, she keyed the mic one last time. "Port control, the situation is stabilized. Fleet command has the con. Sea Dragon is out." She clicked off the radio and placed it back on the bar with a quiet, final thud. The spell was broken. The room was still dark, still lit by the hellish red glow, but the panic had been replaced by a profound, cathedral-like awe. Every single person in the room was staring at her, their faces a mixture of reverence and fear. She turned, her gray eyes sweeping over them, finally landing on Commander Marcus Thorne. He flinched as if she had struck him. His face, which had been a mask of rage, then panic, then disbelief, had finally settled on a look of pure, abject horror. The horror of a man who has just realized he has not merely made a mistake, but has committed a sin against the very gods of his own religion. The front doors of the tavern burst open again. This time, it wasn't the wind. It was 2 Navy master-at-arms, flanking a figure who moved with an aura of absolute command that made Thorne's earlier swagger look like a child's pantomime. He was an old man, his face a roadmap of a lifetime at sea, but his back was ramrod straight. On his collar were the 5 silver stars of a fleet admiral. It was Admiral Jackson Stonewall Carr, the Supreme Allied Commander. Atlantic, a living legend. The Admiral's eyes, sharp and piercing, scanned the dark room, ignoring everyone until they found the woman. The instant he saw her, his entire demeanor changed. The stern, commanding presence dissolved, replaced by something else. Relief and a deep, profound respect that bordered on reverence. He strode directly to her, the two master-at-arms snapping to attention at the door. He stopped a foot in front of her, and in a motion as sharp and precise as a rifle bolt, he rendered a perfect, textbook salute. "Doctor," he said, his voice resonating with authority and gratitude. "On behalf of the United States Navy, thank you. We were blind. We didn't see the microburst forming. You just saved us from a catastrophe of unimaginable proportions." The entire room, filled with officers and enlisted personnel, watched a five-star fleet admiral salute a woman in a plain, rankless uniform. It was a moment that broke reality. The woman simply gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "The models were inadequate, Admiral. They failed to account for the thermal inversion over the bay. I was running a new predictive algorithm." Admiral Carr held his salute. "Your algorithm just saved the flagship, a dozen tugboats, and an oil tanker. The President is on his way to Norfolk. He wants a personal debrief." He finally lowered his hand, and his gaze fell upon Commander Thorne, who looked as if he was about to be physically ill. The Admiral's eyes narrowed. He took in the scene. The furious, humiliated commander. The woman's cracked cover on the table. The circle of stunned onlookers. His legendary perception missed nothing. "Commander?" the Admiral said, his voice dropping several degrees in temperature. "Was there a problem here?" Thorne opened his mouth, but only a dry, croaking sound came out. He was paralyzed, caught in the headlights of his own career-ending stupidity. It was the woman who answered, her voice calm and clinical. "There was a tactical failure, Admiral. The commander made an assessment based on incomplete and prejudiced data, leading to a flawed engagement. He failed to correctly identify a non-traditional asset." She picked up her cracked cover from the table. "And he damaged mission-critical equipment." The Admiral's eyes were chips of ice. He looked at Thorne, then back at the woman. "Doctor, what is your recommendation?" The question hung in the air. She held the power of life and death over Thorne's career. She could have him court-martialed, stripped of his rank, and thrown out of the service in disgrace. Thorne knew it. The entire room knew it. He squeezed his eyes shut, waiting for the axe to fall. She looked at Thorne, her gray eyes not with anger, but with the detached interest of a scientist examining a microbe under a microscope. "Court-martial is inefficient, Admiral," she said. "It teaches one man a lesson, but the institutional flaw remains. The commander's failure was not one of malice, but of ignorance, a failure of imagination. The proper response to ignorance is not punishment. It is education." She turned her full attention to Thorne. He flinched, forced to meet her gaze. "Commander Thorne," she began, her voice the quiet, inescapable sound of judgment. "You have just witnessed a scenario where unconventional thinking and the immediate integration of non-standard assets were required to avert disaster. Your response was to attempt to enforce a rigid, superficial interpretation of hierarchy. You saw a uniform, not the person wearing it. You saw a lack of insignia, not a presence of competence. This is a critical vulnerability in your command philosophy." She paused, letting the words sink in, each one a nail in the coffin of his arrogance. "You screamed at me. You accused me of being unworthy. You did not ask who I was. You did not ask what I did. Your pride and your prejudice made you blind and deaf in a tactical situation. If that storm had been a surprise attack, your response would have gotten your entire crew killed. Her voice was not raised. It was quiet, precise, and utterly devastating. She was deconstructing him, piece by piece, not out of anger, but as a form of instruction. Therefore, she continued, turning back to the Admiral, I recommend Commander Thorne be reassigned. Effective immediately, he will serve as my new executive aide. A collective, silent gasp went through the room. It was a fate worse than a court-martial. It was a sentence of forced, daily, intimate humiliation and education. He would be the glorified bag carrier for the woman he had tried to publicly destroy. He would have to watch her, learn from her, and obey her every calm, precise command. He would be forced to confront his own inadequacy every single day. The Admiral considered it for a moment. Then a slow, grim smile touched his lips. It was a brilliant, elegant, and terrifyingly appropriate solution. An excellent recommendation, Doctor. So ordered. He gestured to one of his aides. Mr. Howard, see to it. Commander Thorne, you will report to Dr. Eris Thorne at 0600 tomorrow morning for your new duties, and you will address her as Ma'am or Doctor. Am I understood? Dr. Eris Thorne. The name descended on the room like a bomb. There was not a single person in the upper echelons of the Navy or NATO who did not know that name. Dr. Eris Thorne, the civilian head of the Navy's Asymmetrical Warfare Development Group, the Navarch, the Sea Dragon, a certified genius with doctorates in hydrodynamics, chaos theory, and computational physics. She was a legend, a ghost who drifted between the Pentagon, research labs, and classified operational theaters. She held no rank, but her authority superseded that of admirals. She was the Navy's ultimate weapon, a mind that could bend physics and strategy to her will. She wore a blank uniform because no combination of insignia could possibly represent what she was. Her competence was her rank. Commander Marcus Thorne finally understood. The woman he had berated was not just an officer. She was an institution. He had not just insulted a superior. He had committed blasphemy. He managed a weak, strangled, yes, Admiral. His world had been dismantled and reassembled in the space of 10 minutes, and he was now a footnote in it. Dr. Thorne gave a final, curt nod. I will expect you to be on time, Commander, she said, her voice betraying no hint of triumph. It was merely a statement of expectation. Then she turned and walked out of the bar, flanked by the Admiral, leaving a wake of shattered pride and stunned silence. The story of that night in the Anchor and Chain became a legend in the fleet, a modern military fable told in wardrooms and on mess decks from Norfolk to Yokosuka. It became a teaching tool at the Naval Academy and the War College. The details grew with each telling. The storm became a Category 5 hurricane. The tugboat captain was said to have been blindfolded. The woman was said to have calculated the final trajectory on a cocktail napkin. But the core of the story, the essential truth of it, remained. Years later, a new class of eager, ambitious ensigns sat in a lecture hall at the Naval War College in Newport. Their instructor was a man who carried himself with a quiet, profound humility that seemed at odds with the captain's eagles on his collar. His name was Captain Marcus Thorne. He was widely regarded as one of the most insightful and wisest instructors at the college, known for his focus on intellectual humility and the dangers of assumption. He stood before the class, his face calm, his eyes holding the quiet wisdom of a man who had been taken apart and put back together, stronger and better than before. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice quiet but carrying to the back of the hall. Today, We are going to talk about identifying assets. We are going to talk about the difference between the appearance of authority and the reality of competence. He paused, and a flicker of a memory, a ghost of a red-lit bar and a howling wind, crossed his face. "Let me tell you a story," he said, "about the biggest mistake I ever made. It begins in a dive bar in Norfolk, with me, a fool full of unearned confidence, and a woman drinking a glass of water." And he told them the story. His story. He used his own humiliation as the ultimate lesson. He taught them that the most dangerous enemy is not the one you can see, but the assumptions you hold within yourself. He taught them that true strength is not loud, but quiet. That respect is not demanded by insignia, but commanded by action. He taught them the lesson of the sea dragon, for that is the ultimate moral of the tale. In the rigid, hierarchical world of the military, or indeed in any organization, it is easy to mistake the symbols of power for power itself. It is easy to judge a person by the decorations on their chest or the lack thereof. But true competence, true authority, is a quality of the soul, not the uniform. It is quiet. It is efficient. It does not need to boast, for its actions are its argument. The loudest person in the room is often the weakest, their volume a desperate attempt to mask their own insecurity. The quiet professional, the hidden master, does not seek validation. They simply are. And when the storm comes, when the lines snap and the world is about to end, their silence will break, and their voice will be the one that calms the sea. They are the ones who have truly earned the right to wear the cloth, not through the medals they have been given, but through the disasters they have averted, often without anyone ever knowing their name.